Good evening, everyone. Is Amy with us tonight?
I am here. Yes, I am.
That's you. You're the host.
I'm the mystery one. Yes.
Do we want to get started or should we wait a few minutes?
There's only one that I haven't heard of that I haven't heard from, whether they're coming or not. So everybody that I know is coming is here. So
Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you again. It's been a little while. Let's see here. Just a quick recap. We've gotten through a majority of the comprehensive plan. We still are going to do some fine tuning to the policies and objectives, but we decided in conversation with Amy and with Shannon that we would do so later in the process towards the end of the code development portion of our work to make sure that the comprehensive plan and the code are in alignment. So now we are officially shifting the focus of our work to the code update. And what we want to spend our time on tonight is just going through the different code topics that we plan to address in the coming months, along with you all, along with your review and guidance. And so tonight, Elizabeth Decker, who you've met, is going to lead a presentation on these different code concepts that we're going to be addressing in the coming months. And then also going to introduce to you Heather Austin, one of my colleagues at 3J Consulting, who is going to be helping out as well, taking on some of the code update work as well. So the two of them will be kind of doing this work in tandem. So if there are not any questions, I'll hand the meeting over to Elizabeth to lead that presentation. But any questions about kind of where we're at in our process?
A quick question. Is this before the city council has gotten into this detail, or are we following up after they've already had a preliminary conversation?
Yeah, city council has not, and Shannon and Amy, if I speak out of turn, please correct me. We really worked with Amy and Shannon to kind of lay out the topics that we're going to be covering. I know that city council has had some conversations about some of these topics, but I don't know that they have like reviewed the specific kind of list of topics and code concepts that we're going to be presenting tonight. So I think we are kind of leading with the guidance from Amy and Shannon and others, our conversations with them, and then with you all, we're kind of developing these recommendations that will then go to council. I don't think council has seen the full list, but Amy or Shannon, correct me if I misrepresented that in any way.
So John, council is having work sessions on some of the topic areas, and they are also considering which direction they would like to see. And as they formulate their opinions, they will make sure to translate that information through Amy and I to Steve to be able to give to the PAC, so that you know what council is thinking, so that we're all on the same page, that when you give your recommendations back to council.
Thanks for that clarification, Shannon. So a little bit of a parallel process, I guess, would be a better way to describe it. Great question. All right, Elizabeth, take it away.
Yeah, great. We're going to highlight some of those areas where we are looking for some council feedback, so that it'll definitely be a parallel with crossover kind of process, I would say. So welcome all. Here we are. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Again, I'm Elizabeth Decker, and I'm with JET Planning. I work with Steve and 3J a lot, and I'm here joining the project at the stage to work on the code, right? As we worked through the code audit together at the last meeting, and now we're getting into some of the code updates themselves. So in terms of the concepts, we wanted to sort of catch you up on how we're approaching these code updates, because we're going to talk about a handful of really important topics tonight, but we don't want you to think that we've forgotten, and we don't want you to forget all the other code updates that we're simultaneously working on, because we are able to get direction through the audit and through your feedback at the previous meeting. So we are continuing to work on that. As you'll recall, we use these 3 categories to classify some of the code audit findings, sort of the housekeeping, which fall more in the consistency and reorganization issues. All of those we are moving forward with, but we don't need further sort of direction on a policy level at this meeting from you all to keep working on those, but those will all be implemented in the code updates. Also in the excuse me, in the compliance category, we had a number of items that we, identified that the city's code had not been updated to match just myriad state regulations that are getting passed fast and furious at the state level, including more in this session. But so all of those pieces will also be included in the work, but just given that they're state regulations, we're not looking for any additional policy input at this time to guide our update work. And so the central category that we're looking for focus on for us to discuss tonight is those topics that we identified with green as sort of being more of a policy opportunity, where there's a part of the existing code that could better align with the comprehensive plan as it's being developed. And part of the reason that we've held the comprehensive plan from to go forward for adoption a little bit later, so that we can do a little bit of back and forth as needed if as we're developing some zoning, we realize like, oh, we almost got it right in the comp plan, but we just want to modify this a little bit so that there's a closer fit. So we'll be working on the comp plan for better alignment on some of these code updates. And also we heard about the importance of the work that council's doing and their goals across several areas. And so we're working to integrate that into some of these policy opportunity code updates. So within this sort of green category, we wanted to, take this great opportunity, throw the code books open, start working on it, but also keep the updates within, like enough that collectively we can all keep our arms around it. So we needed to get some more direction. We've had some really productive discussions with city staff, more input about how the council is working and reflecting back on city priorities so that we can better identify which of those policy opportunities we want to discuss in further detail with you all, and where we might be getting some more some input from additional directions that will fold into the updates that we'll bring back to you. So to start off with, this is the list of all of those green areas, those policy issues where we will be working on developing those policies. So we wanted to just remind you of all the work that we'll be doing. A lot of these, we had good feedback from you all at our previous meeting, some of the questions about some of the audit findings and what that would mean and the importance of some of these issues. So we wanted to assure you we are working on these, but we have some different inputs in terms of how that policy is going to be shaped, so that we don't need to discuss them in full detail tonight. But we will, rest assured, we are working on all of these. I point out particularly like vacation rental standards and the historic resource standards. Because council has some work sessions on that, we'll be tying into the work that they're doing and take their input as part of the consideration, so that we're on the right track for code updates with your further input, so we can come up with something that then loops back together and really better hits the target that we're aiming for. Some of these other issues, things like stormwater, wetlands, floodplains, there is some policy work, but a lot of it is really aligning with some best practices and state requirements. So we do have input that we're taking into this. All of this we will be bringing back to you with those code updates. So we're not saying you'll never see these again, but we aren't talking, they're not our focus tonight. We just wanted to start by reassuring you that we heard the importance of these and we will be working on them. So even though I said we're not talking about that, quick pause to if you have any questions about this list and sort of how we're getting started.
I do, excuse me. Do we have a date for the council work sessions for the vacation rentals and also the historic resource standards?
Shannon, is that something you could update us with?
No?
So the vacation rental discussion happened last month, and we are going to be bringing forth some more information to council that they requested likely in the May timeframe. The historic session, we are working with state representatives with their schedule, and that will be forthcoming in either May, June, or July, depending on their schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions about some of the topics on this list before we move, just to clarify, before we move on to talking through the ones that we do have a lot more detail to share with you tonight?
This is Shirley. This is just a quick question in terms of a definition. Excuse me for not knowing this, but can you please tell me under floodplain standards what no net fill means?
Pop quiz. Good question, Shirley. I believe that the concept relates to if you're placing a structure in the floodway that it can't displace additional, or if you're doing earthwork, that's sort of the total area of those improvements cannot create any net increase of volume within that flood area that would further displace floodwaters. But if anyone else here has a better idea, you're welcome to jump in.
Okay, thanks.
Robin, do you know something about no net fill, or do you have a different question?
I have a different question.
Welcome.
And thank you. I wish I had an answer for Shirley, but I don't. Regarding the last one, procedural standards include clear and objective residential option. Is that going to include, and I'm sorry if I belabor this point, more single level housing? Is that it captured in that last bullet point?
Yeah, no, that item is separate from the form the housing would take. And so the procedural standards here that we're talking about just mean that if someone's applying for a project, it's how their application gets reviewed, whether it can go to a staff person for review, sort of more like a checklist, does it meet a 10-foot setback? Does it not? Or, does it need to go to the planning commission and the city council to decide, is this compatible with our neighborhood? And so that latter category, the more discretionary reviews, need to be transformed into clear and objective reviews that can better, support the development of housing, whether it's those one-story, homes that you're talking about, or other forms of housing.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a definition of no net fill. I looked it up real quick.
Oh, thank goodness.
It's if you bring any fill onto the floodplain, then you have to take out of the floodplain an equal amount of fill.
Great.
So it basically accomplishes what you were saying before.
Great, but it's about fill, doesn't have to do with structures. Thanks for that clarification. All right, any other questions here before we get into the good part, the things that we are going to spend more time talking about? Okay, we can always come back, but let's get into the good stuff here. So the main items that we want to discuss with you this evening, and get some feedback before we start crafting the code updates, generally have to do with residential uses, as well as we've heard a lot of interest in open space and park standards, and also looking at the agricultural holding zone. So Heather and I have teamed up on this, and so you get to hear a little bit from both of us. I think I start off with a few, and then I will hand it over to her. So we're going to start off talking about development in the residential zones. So this is, sort of a key opportunity for the city to update. I'll also just say that this is definitely one of those areas where the comp plan has some general direction, but not very specific direction as currently drafted. And so as we get into writing this code, part of the reason that this is a policy question is because there isn't specific comp plan direction. So we might decide that the comp plan general direction is great and we can, make it more refined in the zoning code. And we might decide to go back to the comp plan and add a little more specificity that's consistent with the zoning. So we can just, how it gets translated. We have multiple vehicles is the point here. But we are really looking for your policy input here about how we can use the existing dimensional and density standards in these zones to better address the intensity and the efficiency and the amount of housing that can be built in different neighborhoods. So generally speaking, the code has, a minimum lot size, sometimes has some minimum and maximum densities to set that density in each zone. And this has the most, is sort of the most prescribed for the single family detached homes on an individual lot. If you're coming forward with a new subdivision, particularly that's where the minimum lot sizes are, one of the biggest drivers of what the scale of that subdivision looks like. And so getting those standards, those dimensional standards right is really important for setting the capacity and the scale of housing. But right now, as shown in the audit, the existing standards are pretty inconsistent. And some zones have one standard for lots, but they don't have densities, and other zones have densities, but not minimum lots. Density is measured both as gross and net. So gross is before you take out roadways or environmental wetland areas, and net is, what you have left after it. And it can be about 20 to 25% of the site. So it makes a pretty big difference in the calculations. And there's just not a lot of consistency with how that's measured. Sometimes it's not even clear which one is being specified. And so what we really have the opportunity to do with this code update is to more consistently set those minimum lot sizes and the minimum and maximum densities for each zone. That's what we, our clear charge that we need to achieve with these code updates. And then we have a further sort of optional opportunity to consider some adjustments to the existing standards. So, sort of our step one, the base that we need to accomplish is making sure that there are clear standards and they're tied as closely to the existing standards as possible and filling in some gaps. But this further opportunity is, are there opportunities to adjust those standards that you see where you'd like to see the existing standards revised? Particularly, there are ways that we could increase the intensity in some of these residential zones. So by making smaller minimum lot sizes or higher densities, that could encourage more efficient land use. But that's definitely a policy direction where we would be looking for clear input from you all, and then, of course, from City Council as well. We went on. So to give you an idea of the landscape here, what we're working with in terms of lot sizes and densities, we're focusing just on single family detached homes here. So the the R1 zone is far and away the most common residential single family detached zone in the city of Carlton. I've got a map right here. Just I'll jump ahead so that you can see it. So the light yellow is all the R1 zone. And that's mostly single family detached. There's a small amount of this sort of olive green is the R3, which is the higher medium density. There is an R2 zone that's supposed to be in between the R1 and R3, but it's not mapped currently. And then there are also a few sort of more special purpose districts, residential districts, and that's this manufactured home district here in light brown. And then this dark purple is a mixed density residential, and you can see that's only applied to 2 specific properties at current. So keep that in mind as we go back to this table. So when we're looking at these different zones, I think, the thing to point out is there's sort of a gradation of these minimum lot sizes. So the minimum lot sizes get smaller as the zones get denser and the density gets higher, right? So, and then the manufactured home zone is somewhat akin to the R1 zone in terms of lot sizes. And then the MX, the mixed density residential, is really a whole separate approach to how it measures lot sizes and density. It sort of falls somewhere around the R2 zone in terms of how many units, but it just has a really different approach, so it's hard to compare directly. And as I was pointing out, some of the different zones don't have all three of these standards we're talking about: the minimum lot size, the minimum density, and the maximum density. Few of these zones have all three of those standards. So we can sort of interpret what the standard would be if we translated one of the standards into the other category. But there are definitely some gaps here. So again, that's sort of the minimum that we need to fill in. But the other broader question is, particularly say the R1 zone here, the R2, is there any interest to decrease, say, by 10%, 20%, some of these minimum lot sizes as part of this work to improve the efficiency of these zones? Or, do you feel pretty satisfied with the scale of development that's permitted now, and you're just looking for that consistency? So when we think about sort of the specific questions that we've got, and this is where we're going to turn it over for group discussion here, and I can answer clarifying questions and get all of your input as well. Just keeping in mind these minimum lot sizes, the adjustments that we'd be considering, right, is that first of all, for that R1, again, the most predominant, mostly single-family detached zone in the city, you can absolutely consider maintaining that existing minimum lot size. You could consider making changes. And the R2 zone, again, not applied currently, but again, this could stay or could get reduced to something like 5,000 square feet. That would be more consistent with the maximum density that's permitted in the zone right now. R3, this is supposed to be the higher density zone in the city. And so given that it permits a range of other housing types at higher densities, one consideration could be here to talk about decreasing this. This is just the minimum lot size for single family detached. If those homes are in the higher density context, it could be appropriate to decrease those lot sizes to as small as 3,000 or 4,000 square feet, almost more like a cottage. And that would give it a little bit more flexibility to get more units within the existing sort of range of intensity and purpose for that zone.
So Elizabeth, can
mhm.
I ask you just a real quick question before you get to our discussion?
Yep.
I may be the only one who needs this, but can you explain what DU/AC stands for?
Yeah, sure. That is the way that we measure density in terms of dwelling units per acre. Thank you. No, I appreciate you calling that out. I had to simplify for the slide to try to fit it in. Great. And then again, just to point out the MH here, right, we're talking about there's a similar opportunity to R1 in terms of if there might be an interest in reducing the minimum lot size to 5,000 to 6,000 square feet. That would be more consistent with the density that's permitted in this zone and other zones for manufactured home parks. And then in the mixed density residential, that's really an interesting code approach. There really is no minimum lot size. And so the question is, do you want to continue to rely upon the density range that's existing, or would it be helpful to establish a minimum lot size here? And I, just threw out some numbers, 4,000 to 5,000 square feet here, that could help achieve that density. So I'll turn it over to the group. Any thoughts here about if you would like to maintain these minimum lot sizes, consider any adjustments, or what questions, refinements, or direction you would have for us as we work on these code updates.
So Elizabeth, this is Shirley. So looking at we're looking at the R2 or the R3 in terms of reducing the lot size.
Well, you could reduce the lot size in any zone, but that's the question.
Right, yeah. So one of the concerns that I have, and I want to make sure this is addressed, so like a lot of JR1, I think all of the lots in JR1 are considered R2, if I'm correct on that. And the idea was that you don't just have to have single family homes, or you could have duplexes. In fact, that smaller lot size encourages that. But in reality, that's not what happened. And so by reducing the lot size, is that going to encourage more in terms of building homes that are, duplexes or, smaller homes, cottages, etc.?
Well, we're definitely going to talk about how to encourage that mix of housing. We've got that coming up in a few concepts. And it is not, I think, so this specific question is, how do you feel about these minimum lot sizes for single family detached? And then we'll talk about what size minimums or other permissions would help with those other housing types. So it's sort of a separate question, but it's also related to a degree of, the scale of single family could influence how desirable or how, how feasible it is to do some of those middle housing types, right? If we keep the minimum lot size, say at 7,500 square feet in R1, which again, keeping these existing lot sizes is absolutely an option. We're just, because we're here, because we're opening the code book, we want to get your policy direction. So if we kept it, at this level, if there were not any decreases proposed, one might hypothesize that other middle, like adding a duplex on that lot, would then be comparatively that much more interesting, right? And financially compelling. If there were options to reduce the minimum lot sizes for single family detached, then maybe those other middle housing options wouldn't be so interesting because they wouldn't offer that much incentive beyond the single family detached. But those are somewhat hypothetical. I mean, I guess those are real considerations for developers, but I don't know how to tell you about their relative importance in this case, other than to say, let's generally focus on the single family detached question first, and we're definitely going to talk about those other types tonight too.
Okay.
I have a question. With these minimum square foot lot sizes, is there some sort of regulation that I don't know if it's county or state, about the allowance of how much of that lot size can be covered? Like only so many square feet can be covered by a dwelling or by a building or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's generally a maximum lot coverage standard. And gosh, I don't have it at my fingertips right now, but that's generally in the code as well. So that would remain.
Okay, thank you.
This is Robin. I'm wondering about whether, if the zones are what would be dictating the lot size more than the, say specific, like with the R1, the 7,500, if we lower that, are we decreasing our options? I hear an awful lot of people in the community, or I have heard a lot, people complaining, even at city council last night. I heard someone speak to how small the lots are. So just playing the devil's advocate here, because I definitely am interested in high density too. just taking into consideration that that is going to just the impact that would have with R1 if we do lower that lot size
All right, thanks.
maximum. Yeah.
Hi, this is Shirley again. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of keeping, a certain, well, I guess let me ask this question first. Are we limited just to these zones, or can we add, or can we have a subset of R1, where you'd have a certain amount that would be somewhat lower, but keep one, set of the zones that is 7,500 square feet?
I mean, hypothetically, anything is possible.
I mean, I just think that, from my perspective, just exactly what Robin was indicating, that it's important to keep a certain amount of the detached single family lots, the larger 7,500 square foot size.
Mhm.
Well, couldn't we just decide at city council when a builder comes in, a developer comes in and wants to change the zone? Can't we determine can't city council determine what the zone is? So then determining how big the lot sizes are? Is that how it goes or no?
Well, it goes to the planning commission.
Oh.
Yeah.
So can I
But Mhm.
can I ask a question? Because it seems like I can't think about making these lots smaller without considering the larger concept of where we're going to put green space within the subdivision. So later on,
Mhm.
there's a discussion around minimum open space and park allotments. Because I don't think, I mean, my sense is that we don't want subdivisions, wall to wall subdivision with no green space in between. But they also with that, we want to preserve our urban growth boundary as best we can, which would involve making a higher density subdivisions. But the worst case scenario is just filling up our urban growth boundary with very high density housing and no green space within those housing. So, I mean, I think a lot of us could tolerate living in a house with a small lot if there was a space to get out and have a little park with our family, just some open space to enjoy. So that's how I see it. I don't know how you can discuss this density thing without thinking about open space and usable park space within each subdivision.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and I can't say this will be a viable strategy, but the first thing that comes to mind, Susie, is thinking about maybe there's a way to couple, request in a new development to reduce lot sizes if there is a real concomitant increase in the amount of open space that's provided, that could tie in with, as you say, that some of the other topics we're talking about tonight. That's one tactic we could introduce into the code to relate to this. And I also just want to say quickly that this is sort of a hard question to just throw out, like, what size lot sizes feel good to you? Normally, we would have a little bit more guidance of like, this is the range you should look between because it fits in your urban growth boundary, or it may, achieves these other adopted policy target ranges. And it is a little bit challenging because we don't have a lot of those sideboards here. Good news, you have a lot of flexibility in where you set these limits. Bad news, sort of hard to know, what to get good guidance. So, this could be another one where, there maybe is a focus on basically maintaining the existing minimum lot size. And, I know the city has expressed some interest in doing additional housing needs analysis, which is now going to be called the housing capacity analysis, that could give you some more information that might help give you a bit more educated insight into whether and how to change those minimum lot sizes in the future.
That would be
Well,
helpful.
and then the other thing I think about is typically in a vibrant functioning city, you have your highest density closest to your businesses. So people are
Mhm.
moving from their homes, they're walking back and forth to businesses, accessing those downtown amenities. But we already have our downtown established without a lot of growth. I mean, there's a lot of housing around our downtown core, which is already R1. And then to establish this really high density at the perimeter of our city, it almost seems backwards. You know what I mean? So it seems
Mhm.
like we would want the most density with our MX zones, where we have an opportunity to put a few businesses, like some downstairs businesses with upstairs apartments, that sort of thing. So that if we are going to do higher density, then that higher density at least has some ability to be a vibrant center for community.
Mhm. Yeah,
I think, Susie, and part of that is, I think when you talk about downtown and being closer to amenities, I mean, the reality is we don't have very many amenities downtown for people to access. And I think we've talked about that, you know, the need for, you know, a more robust grocery store and some of those kinds of things that are the regular kinds of amenities that they would be accessing regular. I guess part of the difficulty I'm having here is, you know, it's like trying to solve simultaneous equations in algebra. You know, it's there's a lot of moving parts here because along with Susie's comment about green space, you know, you kind of also, I think you have to factor in, we've talked about that we want to have more access to affordable housing, which by definition means it's got to be units that are priced in a range to allow that to happen. But also in conjunction with that, what is the impact on traffic patterns and the amount of cars that are parking on streets and all of those kinds of factors. So it's really kind of hard to, you know, to visualize exactly how all these component pieces come together.
yeah, for sure. Robin, you had started to say something earlier. Did you have a comment to add?
Well, I was just thinking that the size of the lot, I was just gonna offer, I live in a R1 zone. It's 4,000 square feet is our lot. It's the smallest lot. 4,500? Oh, Lonnie said 4,500.
Mhm.
I can, but our house is really small too. So I was thinking, you know, the lot size and the size of the house is also plays into the livability, it seems like. And I just talking about moving parts, that's one of the moving parts that makes it hard for me to visualize too. Is it just going to be these great big behemoth places on a postage stamp that is surrounded by cement basically? Or is it, and those are questions or answers I'm sure we just can't, it's speculative, correct? I guess it's how do we encourage livability? And also achieve the goal of having the high density. And maybe it is the cart before the horse. Maybe if we had the green space pieces in place, we might be more comfortable pulling back on some of this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if sort of thinking about both the scale of the lot and the scale of the house are important, we do have additional tools in the code that get to the scale of homes, like the lot coverage that we were talking about earlier, some of the setbacks. And so it's important to hear what pieces are important to the group so that we can reflect that in any code updates we bring forward.
Yeah, I would actually like to emphasize Robin's point that we would like to see some smaller houses on the same size lot as you put the mega house. If for nothing else, for variety, but also for, I mean, it just makes a healthier community if you have a mix of housing. And I really wish that we could require like 5% of the houses in every 10 acre of development be X, under such and such a square footage, just so that we would enforce some variety into our subdivision, so we don't end up with just the typical subdivision that just you can't tell where you are. You could be anywhere in the world. Do you know what I mean? Like they're just
Oh, I sure do. It's like a monoculture.
a
right?
monoculture. Exactly. So if you could, and I think I wrote that a long time ago when you said, well, that doesn't actually work that well. But can you, and I know developers say, well, we want to build what we like to build. Well, I don't know. It's not their ball game. It's our community. And if we say we want some percentage of houses to be, cottages or single story or so many square feet, then, I don't know why we can't do that.
Yeah, it's tricky. All right. I hear that desire.
Yeah. Okay.
Elizabeth, I just looked up the code to get the lot coverages that are current, if that's helpful.
Yes.
So lot coverage R1 is the maximum for combined. So this is all your impervious surface, including like any driveways and things, is 65% when you're over 20 feet in height for your building and 70% when you're under 20 feet or less. So that's your R1, and that's pretty typical. 65%. R2 is 80% when you're exceeding 20 feet in height, 85% when you're 20 feet or less. You can get a little more of the lot developed in that slightly higher density zone. Let me see, it goes to MH next, and that combined total is 65 period, because it's manufactured homes, so no height issues there. R3 has you at 70%, and that again doesn't have any consideration for heights, so that's for everything. And is that it for the zones? Oh, MH was another one. I don't know
MX
that.
is way at the bottom.
Oh,
of the
MX. Okay, let me just go way to the bottom really fast.
Yeah, I don't even know if it has it because
It may not, because commercial, you usually don't. You want things built to the property line and visual interest on the sidewalk. And no, I don't see any for MX. So those are your R zone and MH lot coverage maximums.
Great. Thanks, Heather.
Can we at least, where it's high density, require some percentage to be park? I know that, I think there was something mentioned later in our discussion, perhaps.
Well, yeah, we can talk about how we tie lot sizes to parks. I guess maybe before we move on, and maybe it'll come back to it, I guess, quick, Paul, is the overall sense here that we should keep the existing minimum lot sizes and adjust some of the other standards to tie to parks, to tie to lot coverage, those kinds of things? Or would you like to see us come back with some code updates that would modify, generally reduce, although I suppose we could increase some of these minimum lot sizes? Any interest in seeing that, or a focus on working with what we've got?
Shannon's got her hand raised.
Oh, thank you.
Get your question answered first, Elizabeth. Mine is actually related to green space and subdivisions.
Oh, okay.
I wonder, I think that I could be comfortable with decreasing to 3,000 to 4,000 square feet for R3.
Okay.
I don't know about this. And it sounds like that with the mobile home the MH,
Mhm.
that's actually would be in line with the manufactured home park densities, that 5,000 to 6,000.
Yeah.
So
I guess my on the MH side of things, um, I think our manufactured home area right now, when you drive through it, is visually, it's nice. When you go through some of the manufactured home parks themselves, I mean, uh, you feel like you're at a campsite that everybody has kind of pulled their trailer in, and you really feel tight in there. So I don't know for MH if you'd want to go that direction just from a visual standpoint. I mean, that's my sense. I do agree with what Robin said about the R3. That probably helps us to achieve some of our objectives with respect to trying to provide the opportunity for more affordable housing.
Yep, I'm comfortable with reducing lot sizes in both R2 and R3 in the interest of saving our urban growth boundary. But like I said, it always comes back to if we're giving legitimate space for recreation in those higher densities.
Yeah, I think those have to be tied in together. If you do that, I agree, Susie.
yeah, I agree with you too, John, on that. I guess I haven't been in, a mobile home, manufactured home park in a while. And so it needs to be livable, and if lowering it, it's just interesting to me that with the mobile home, it's as high as R1. The square footage, which that doesn't quite, I don't understand that really, because I don't think of manufactured homes as being as big as homes in R1 could be.
I think the reason for that is because they're all one story, and if you want
Yeah.
some of the square footage, you have to fill up more of the lot.
And spread out. That's important.
Yeah.
Can't go up.
Yeah, I think I'm with you too, Susie, on R2, that lowering it for more flexibility, but for R1, I feel like I'm not really comfortable with that I think we need to have flexibility, and if we allow R1 to be bigger, then that means that's a diversity too, even though we have an abundance of that right now. Carlton is going to grow. I mean, if we're looking at the next 20 years, we may wish that we had more square footage for R1.
Well, and I think too, it gives more of an opportunity for an ADU, for an additional dwelling unit, if you have a larger yacht. And I think R1 is more likely to have an additional dwelling unit on their property than perhaps R2 or R3, which is already higher density.
Yeah.
I do have a question about duplexes, because that, and I think we did visit, I think further on in the documents, you talk about that, Elizabeth, right? That
Yes.
we'd want to encourage duplexes. So if minimizing the R2 would be a detriment, I just want to understand more about that, because I'm not really clear.
Yeah.
Great. Remind me to talk about that if I forget when we get to talking about
So,
duplexes. And just
yeah,
one
but-
quick thing as you continue, just to remember, these are minimum lot sizes. And when we talk about, what people might build in the future, you can always build larger than these lot sizes. That always will remain an option. This is just the minimum that can't be exceeded. So Shirley, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say R2, I don't, to encourage, more density to keep in line with our urban growth. I don't see any advantage to reducing it and the lot size, and it gives more flexibility for building duplexes or cottages, et cetera, on a 6,000 square foot lot rather than a 5,000 square foot lot, it might end up having a net result of less residential homes by reducing that lot size. So I would be in favor of just keeping it 6,000 and the R1 at 7,500.
Okay, thanks.
Excuse me, is there any way we can take it on a case by case basis? I mean, do we have to have everything written in stone at this point and change these around or anything? Or can we look at each subdivision individually? Is that possible?
Right. This is the central tension in planning: certainty versus flexibility, because we want both, right?
Yeah.
Just at different times. So the short answer is there needs to be a firm, certain number that is the base requirement that, we talked a little about clear and objective standards. So a property owner, developer needs to be able to read the code and know this is what I am entitled to build, and I can get my permit. I don't have to ask for, I have to show that I meet the standards, but I'm not asking for a favor to get to do this. There can be an option, through often like a planned unit development or other discretionary processes, where developers can ask for different lot sizes and can put together a proposal and explain why a different different mix of lot sizes is going to make a community that better meets the, comprehensive plan goals and other priorities for the city of Carleton. So that's typically how cities have certainty and flexibility, but there does need to be a certain standard.
Okay.
So just asking a question as a follow-up on that then is, if we had a certain standard, like R2 or something, and a developer came in and said, we'd like to reduce the lot size, but we also, as part of, because we want to put on more units or whatever whatever it is, but as part of the
Why
compensation,
don't you grab a chair?
as part of the compensation for that, then
Taken.
we'll provide park space or something. Is that what you're talking about as
Yeah.
providing for flexibility?
Yeah, that's a way to do it.
Mm.
Elizabeth, can I circle back just really quickly to the MH zone?
yeah.
I think just as far as the minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet is only for single family detached homes.
Including a single manufactured home.
A single manufactured home, right? But in the parks, I think the reference was to these lot sizes, and in a park, it's 3,500 square feet per unit. I just wanted to clarify that these minimums would only apply to platted individual lots for either stick-built homes or manufactured homes, and wouldn't apply inside your parks.
That explains maybe what John was talking about earlier, where the parks feel a little tight. That's because the lot sizes are half the size of what we're talking about here for MH zone.
Yeah.
So is it correct to say that we don't have any of those $3,500 or 3,500 foot lot sizes in our city? Is our manufactured home section up front all 7,500 or greater?
No, it couldn't be.
Yeah.
Parks, in the parks, you would have the 3,500. I don't know where those parks are offhand, if they're in the city or not, but any parks in the city are probably developed at that 3,500 square foot lots, as opposed to single units on their own parcel at 7,500 outside of parks. So that's why
Shannon, do we have any of those parks in our city? Do you know?
Amy, maybe you can chime in here. Can you confirm whether that park off of First Street is 3,500 square foot lot or approximately?
I believe they are 3,500 square foot lots, and then Carlton Oaks was actually placed before we had a comprehensive plan. So I think those lots are actually even smaller over there. But yes, Madison Loop off of First Street is the one that meets our current code.
Thanks. All right, I'm also,
Sorry, Elizabeth. I was just trying mentally to get a sense of how big 7,500 feet is. And Lon was telling me that the lot next door to us, which is empty on Cooch and Johnson, is 7,500 feet. Oh, it's 10. Oh, 100 by 100. Never mind, you guys.
I can give you,
Ignore that.
I can give you a sense for, I am on a 7,500 square foot lot, and we put a manufactured home on it and filled it up as much as we could, and we have 1,800 square feet to our house.
You do. Okay.
So, and we added a garage and everything, but that was that's about the maximum that you can put on a 7,500. So it's, you know,
That
it allows
helps.
for.
That helps a lot, John. Thank you.
I'm also just keeping an eye on time, and I know we have some other topics. We've alluded to some of them. So I think the feedback that you guys have given us on where we might play with these is going to give us a sense. We're going to talk about some related concepts. So I think let's continue this theme and talk about some slightly different concepts. Just talking about density, I think, you know, here's sort of the direction that I'm hearing from you about the minimum lot sizes is going to help us on this density here. But maybe the one question that I would really like to hear from you all on density is, to the extent that there are standards in the code right now on density, they're mostly maximums. And a question is, would you like to see a minimum density standard that essentially says, it promotes that greater efficiency of land, so that if it is an R1 zone, or, you know, particularly in, you know, the R3, here's where you're trying to have higher density, having a minimum is really important there. So you don't get people coming in and saying, oh, here's where we're building 20,000 square foot homes in an area that you had been hoping to provide some greater density and help maintain that urban form within the UGB. So is there an interest in adding some more minimum densities throughout the code, or just continuing to rely on only the minimum lot size and maximum densities?
I'd like to see minimum, because I really, it bothers me that they say, well, we can develop a lot with a duplex. We're going to make some of these lots big enough for a duplex, and then they just put a single family home on. And that's happened. That's been a pattern. So I would like to see minimum.
That was my point in JR1. That's exactly what happened.
Yes.
So where we have high density housing, that's what our intent is to have high density.
Yeah. Right.
And if you don't do a minimum, then you don't get that. Yeah.
Great. All right. So middle housing, this is our other bigger residential concept to talk about tonight. So there's really sort of several stages that you could approach this in, and I've heard some various interest in these in some of our previous discussion and your great feedback on the audit. And you've already alluded to, you know, this first one. So sort of the first step that we could take with these code updates is to permit ADUs with all single family detached homes, and develop some standards that are in line with state best practices. That's sort of the first step. And, you know, to the extent that we have a recommendation, I would certainly recommend that you do that. You're not quite at a state threshold where you have to do this, but you're so close that this is really a good time to take care of that. And it creates these new opportunities for people to use their property more flexibly. The next stage, and this, you're not required to do this under state requirements, but you're seeing many other cities across the state experiment with permitting duplexes on all lots. So similar, anywhere you could put a single family detached home would also allow a duplex. It sounds like you've had some subdivisions recently that have considered this. maybe haven't actually followed through, but rather than needing special approval for that, it would just be allowed on almost any lot. Is a way that you could permit that. And then sort of a third step that you could consider, if you have policy direction for us to include in the code updates, would be to look at further what we call middle housing options. That's, all these things in between single family detached and apartments. So we could look at adding some more townhouse options. Right now, you can only do 2 townhouses in a few zones. And also considering a cottage cluster option, which are smaller single family homes in a cluster of sorts around a green space, generally at a higher density because they're smaller. So, again, we've got a lot of single family homes, we've got ADUs. These are some of the middle housing types that could be considered. Cottage clusters, like we were talking about, clustered around a green space. And I won't belabor this chart today since I want to make sure we leave time for Parks and Open Space with Heather. But there are some housing options beyond single family detached and apartments right now in the city, but they're fairly limited. Things like duplexes being restricted to corner lots or townhouses only being 2 units. And so the yellow highlighting here is really about where you could consider expanding use permissions. That P is for a permitted use. So again, you see the accessory dwelling units, that would be, probably our top recommendation. Duplex is sort of a stage 2 recommendation. And then some of these townhouses and cottage clusters would be a stage 3. So this is a great topic, and I don't mean to rush you, but I am aware we're already at 7 and we've got about 3 more concepts. So quick feedback on 1, 2, or 3 that you'd be interested to see some more code concepts on, or code updates.
I would encourage all of them. ADUs, duplexes, cottage clusters. I think they're all a great idea. And I think it's a way to introduce diversity into neighborhoods.
I agree. I like what you have on this chart here as proposal.
Okay.
And I ditto that, Shirley.
You surely did. I have some anxiety about the townhouses, just because we're seeing them everywhere. They're 2-story, and there's a lot of people that cannot use them, and it's really, I think that developers do very well with them because they can put them so, make all those units on smaller lots. And so I just really wonder about that. I don't want Carlton to become a townhouse, mecca.
Robin,
So, I really hear Robin's point on that. And I think what we would really like to see as a community is some small houses, just some, 2-bedroom living room, kitchen houses that really can accommodate elderly people and people with just a young family just starting out. And I don't know how I don't know. That's why you're the experts, yeah? To make, because that's what we want to see. We want to see those mixed in with all the big houses.
I'm confused about this, and maybe I need to bring it up later, but I thought with JR3 that there's a whole block of townhouses.
Yeah, I don't think we can talk about those, Robin.
Okay, but it's just that kind of thing, seeing that. I don't mean yes or no, but somehow, I mean, I didn't know we just had 2 units allowed, so.
Yeah, well, that's in the R2 and the R3 zones. And it's possible, I don't know what that project's in, or if it came through as a planned unit development where you can propose a different combination of units. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. If I can just throw in just 2 cents on it, not being super involved with Carlton yet. But having the R1 zone not permit any kind of townhomes and then the R2 be limited to your 2 units, you're really just saying that in your R3 and your MX where you want those higher densities, you'd be willing to see those larger blocks of townhomes. So you're still really preserving those opportunities for the smaller home styles if you keep the R2 at the 2 units. So this sort of gives a balance, I think, to what I'm hearing might be the priority.
Thank you. That's helpful. You're right.
What sort of,
Wait, go ahead.
how would we work with the accessory dwelling units? What kind of regulations or anything would be regarding those? I mean, could they just be plopped down in someone's extra space? I mean, I'm not sure I understand how that would work.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, if there is interest in those, which I've heard from a few folks tonight, then we would come back with some more detailed concepts around that and we can talk about that. Generally there's detached ADUs, right? Where someone can build a 800 square feet as a common maximum size, but a small detached structure in their backyard, or possibly convert their garage or add some space above their existing garage. Those are sort of some detached options. Other times people build an attached ADU where maybe they convert the basement into a separate unit, or they have a portion of the house that they convert, or they add on, a physical addition to the existing home that functions as that separate ADU. So there's different ways that they can be created with existing homes.
So does the ADU
Okay, but that would
conversation?
I'm sorry. Well, that would all have to be within the percentage that can cover that piece of property, correct?
Correct. They're still subject to
Okay.
the same dimensional standards. So the height,
Okay.
the setbacks, the coverage, all of those continue to apply.
So
Okay.
does the ADU overlap with the vacation rental issue, or is it ADU just for residency?
Well, I would say that we would be looking for some council direction on that question, but I would encourage that we consider ADUs as a residence option primarily. And if it's important to this group that ADUs only be used for that purpose, then that should be part of the concepts and the policies that you propose. Okay, I'm going to move us along just because I know we have exciting parks issues to talk about too. Last one from me tonight is about the agricultural zone. Right now it's all the dark green zone here, and it sort of functions as a holding area. I say sort of because it's meant to function as a holding area until those areas can, be brought into urban services and urban levels of density and future development. It's within the urban growth boundary. It has an important role to play for the future development of Carlton. But right now there's an odd standard that allows really small lot sizes and doesn't restrict lot division. And so there's concern that those properties could be developed sort of asynchronously. So we're looking at ways to strengthen the holding provisions. So a couple of things, looking at limiting redevelopment within those areas until urban zoning can be applied. And then within the zoning code, a couple standards that we'd propose to require rezoning prior to development, so that you can't develop in the agricultural holding. You have to apply to be R1 or R2 or commercial or industrial, to prohibit land division until that happens, and to set a much higher minimum lot size. 10 acres seems to be a common standard. McMinnville has that, a couple other Willamette Valley communities, so that these really stay in a holding zone. So any comments on how that holding could work, or if we're on the right track there?
What is our minimum lot size now?
7,500 square feet, which is the
Oh my
same as the R1 zone.
Oh,
Yeah.
as opposed to 10 acres?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we definitely
Yes.
need to make some changes.
Yeah.
This direction.
Change it, please.
Okay. Great. Heather, I'm turning it over to you. Without further ado.
Okay, great. And I just have two topics to cover with you, but I think they're ones that everybody's excited about. This is a great conversation. The first is the clear and objective standards concept. So by state law, Oregon Revised Statute 197307 sub 4, a city may adopt and apply only clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures to needed housing development. So you have to determine that someone can go down a checklist and say it meets the setback, it meets the height, it meets the lot coverage, and maybe some design, some site and building design things that are so easy to apply. Anyone can see it does or it doesn't. So the effect, they may not have the effect either in themselves or cumulatively of discouraging the development of the housing. So you can't use a lengthy review process or a high cost for review to delay housing that's needed per your housing needs analysis or your housing production strategy, or I can't remember which one you guys are working on right now, but your housing projects. Yep, we can move to the next one, please, Elizabeth. So just to make sure that there's no clear and objective standard definition in the Oregon Revised Statute, which I find to be a bit problematic. I've been asked this by a lot of different cities and citizens. What does it mean that it's clear and objective? How do you know for sure? We don't know for sure, but we're doing the best we can and trying to just make sure that it makes sense to people like yourselves who are on these advisory committees and can give your input on it. So, but generally we want them to be free from any personal or subjective judgment calls. So things like it's compatible with the neighborhood, that would require someone to make a judgment call of what compatibility within a neighborhood is. We want to make sure it's uniformly verifiable. So this is where it's really helpful if they're numerical. Setbacks, heights, lot coverages, those are all considered clear and objective. You are or you aren't. Things like entryway, well, we'll get to the site and design things, but you need to be really specific about what standards you're applying so that it's even, maybe a small checklist for how you meet each of the standards. We'll go to the next slide, please. So generally what we're seeing in clear and objective standards in other cities throughout the state are like design standards for the building. So minimum percentage of windows, 25%. Your front street facing has to have 25% glazing, whether it's windows or glass on the doors. Maybe there's some list of prohibited materials. You cannot use T111 siding. You cannot use untreated concrete block to make your fronts of your buildings. Limits on blank wall stretches. You want to make sure that there's visual interest, maybe every 50 or 70 feet on multifamily buildings, you have some sort of bay or porch requirement that breaks up those long, kind of boring stretches of building. And same thing between the different levels of a structure. If you have a 3-story multifamily structure, you want to be able to see a distinct, board and batten or some other kind of distinguisher between each of the levels. So they don't just all blend in together and create a big mass. And then I alluded to this enhanced and articulated entry because I actually got called out on this one recently in Newburgh. I made it too broad. I said entry covers porches and other similar treatments, and that did not fly. Their city council said that seems pretty subjective to me, and I said, you're right. let's roll it back and identify 5 entry articulations that we all agree could be an addition to this site. It's a particularly nice one to add because you can get in a situation, especially with multifamily, where you can't tell where the front door is. And that can be difficult for emergency services, but even, food delivery or other types of services like that, you'd like them to be able to know where to go when you approach a building. Then those are the sort of building related things. Then we have site related things, such as making sure that in a larger, and these are, again, generally multifamily development, you're putting the parking to the side or the rear of the building so that you're not having this huge sea of parking that you need to cross from the sidewalk to get to the front door. Or that as you're walking along or biking along or even driving along, you're not just seeing parked cars, you're seeing this beautiful building that we've required to be articulated and have windows. With the landscaping and open space requirement, this is, it's important to make sure that we do have setbacks, but in addition, most multifamily projects, you want to have some level of either private or shared or both open space on the property as well. So you can set minimum percentages, and you do have those in your code currently. I just looked, and you have, I believe it's if you're over 10 units, you have a requirement to put in a open space for the residents of that development. And then again, dimensional standards are the low hanging fruit. They're so easy. They're numerical. They're clear and objective already, and you already have them in your code. Any changes that are made through this process, of course, would apply here, but they're easy, and you don't have to put too much time into that. And I believe that is it for clear and objective. Elizabeth, if you want to just, I can't remember what my next slide was. Oh, nope, one more. Okay. So this came into play in a couple of the cities that we've worked in, especially for multifamily housing, that you have your clear and objective pathway and your either type 1 or type 2 staff level review process. But then you have maybe a project that can't meet the clear and objective pathway. They want to do some sort of awesome new frontage on it that could be considered concrete block, but is actually like all the rage and it looks awesome, but you can't meet the clear and objective design standards with it. You can, as a city, choose to have a secondary discretionary review path that a property owner or developer can choose to use. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. You don't have to put all of your eggs in the clear and objective basket, but you have to have the clear and objective basket. So those are my presentations as quick as I could on clear and objective design standards. And I know we don't have a lot of time into getting into what are the most important items that we should include when looking at this type of condition to add, but are there questions about clear and objective design standards or review standards?
When you talk about open space requirements for multifamily housing, can we make it so that the open space doesn't just happen to be the leftover land that they can't develop anyway, that's like in a floodplain or something, so that it's usable open space?
Sure. Yeah, I often see that it's that setbacks can be used, but that there's some minimum usable open space is what you would call that. So you can say like 20% of your site needs to be an open space, and you can include your setbacks, but you need to put some sort of usable space. And again, we have to be careful about what's clear and objective there. We'd have to identify, what constitutes usable. It's a picnic bench, it's a play structure, it's a dog area, it's and you can list as many of those as you want to, but as long as they meet one of those things. And if they can't and they have this awesome new thing, they can go through the discretionary path and still build that. But you can definitely have those minimums for how much of it is usable open space versus more passive visual open space.
And I guess I don't mind if it's usable, like if it has a play structure or a tennis court. That's not what I mean. I just mean a place where humans can walk through it and use it at will. So
Yeah.
maybe it does have a play structure. Maybe it has any of those other things that you listed, but also it could just be a place with a few trees, but just has access for humans. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
and I think in addition to the open space requirement, then you could certainly consider pedestrian accessibility standards throughout the development. So just making sure that you have pathway requirements, connectivity between the buildings, connectivity
Yes.
from the public street to each of the buildings. Those are very easy,
want
clear and
all that.
objective standards. Yeah, that can definitely be part of it.
Yeah.
Sure. Any other?
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
this is Shirley. No, I'm just going to say that this objective standards concept is very important to what we're trying to accomplish. So I am very much in agreement with this process.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Shirley. Well, let's talk about parks really fast. I want to be respectful of your time and of the great discussion, but I was asked to speak on this because I've worked in 2 jurisdictions where there are standards for this. So I know, oh, and Shannon, do you want to talk now before I jump into the slides?
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
that, Heather. The city council just had a work session on this last night. A pretty extensive work session. And so we will be forwarding the audio in the presentation to the PAC as well as the Planning Commission members, because it was a very thorough discussion and we'll be following up on this. So this is one of those topic areas that is going simultaneously.
Thank you for that, Shannon. That's great. We have on our slide that a discussion is forthcoming, so we can just say it's yesterday coming or came already. But that's wonderful. And I just want to make the distinction here that, and I heard many of you already say this, but we have open space standards that would apply to multifamily housing that are separate from what I have experience in with these 2 jurisdictions, Sherwood and North Plains, where it's more subdivision based. Although I will say in North Plains, we went one step further and included some open space requirements for mixed use property, but I'll get there in a moment. So let me just go to the next slide, please, Elizabeth, and we'll start with Sherwood. So in Sherwood, and they've had this open space requirement in place for probably 2 decades now, about 20 years, this has been in place that if you build a residential subdivision, you have to have 5% of the net buildable site maintained in open space. So, and here we have that usable open areas. So I know this isn't the multifamily that we were talking about earlier, but they specifically define parks, swimming and wading pools, grass areas for picnics and recreational play, walking paths. And here's where I'd argue it's probably not clear and objective to say an other like space. So I'm guessing that they're due for a clear and objective review of this standard, but this is their standard that's on the books today. They do not allow the inclusion of setbacks, visual corridors, sensitive areas, and buffers, and anything else in this area because this is space that's outside of the lots. So this is different than multifamily where you might have the space overlap with some setbacks. Here you're actually setting aside area outside of each of the lots. So just to see what that looks like, if you'll click on the next slide, Elizabeth. This is the Brookman Road corridor, which is actually probably many of you have driven by this south area of Sherwood on Highway 99 when heading toward the Portland Metro. And the areas that are the light green are the parks that would be required of this level of residential development. So the purple would be like mixed use commercial and wouldn't have a requirement for open space. And then the orange would be like the multifamily where you'd have some open space on each of those sites. But the light green are the parks that would be triggered by the light yellow subdivisions. So if that makes sense, you're looking at about 170 acres of subdivision land and about 8.5 acres of park. So their standard is getting you a good amount, 3 larger neighborhood sized parks. And then the areas that have kind of a gray background, those are their sensitive areas that are in the floodplain that aren't available to them to use as parks because it's specifically excluded in this area. So that's what it looks like when you have this standard, and these parks would be provided by the subdivision, platted with the subdivision. If you'll click to, yeah.
A quick question then, looking at taking this particular standard and applying it to Carlton, I'm assuming we're just talking about anything that's undeveloped, what we would do in the future.
Exactly.
What kind of acreage do we have that's developable and how much park could we get out of that if we had a 5% standard? Do we have any idea on that?
I'll look to staff for any thoughts on that.
I think think that would take some calculation, John, for us to get you an accurate number. There's also some very interesting information in the presentation that was given to council last night about the Parks Master Plan, how much park space we currently have, how much is currently desired per the Parks Master Plan as a policy. So this is an area where I think the two can really benefit from one another. So we will be sure to get that to you ASAP.
Thanks, Shannon. If we can switch to the next slide and talk, we'll just go over the North Plains standard. And this is more recent. So in North Plains, they do things a little differently. All of the land that was brought into the urban growth boundary in 2005 was brought into what's called a neighborhood community holding zone. And everything in the neighborhood community zone requires a master plan. So it's a little different the way development occurred in those areas, but in general, and we worked with the developer of the most recent master plan for this, we came up with 400 square feet per dwelling unit in a subdivision, in addition to 5,000 square feet for every acre that's not zoned residential. So if you'll switch to the next slide, it'll become a little more obvious what that means. So this is the Bryn Hill master plan area. This is 73 acres in size, and there's about 500 residential units here. So everywhere you see the light green is a park or a park. Basically, they use a linear park system as well. Some of those half-acre stretches in the middle are those type of next to a sidewalk where you have like a workout facility and you can follow a path and do, you know, pull-ups and push-ups and come along. And one of them even has like a little bit of lawn bowling or something there that is kind of a new park type thing. The darker green down in the middle, kind of on the left, is their mixed use site. So that's not a park area, but it was developed with, or it went through land use. It hasn't been developed yet. There's been some market issues with development of it, but it did get through land use with 48 residential apartments above about 5,000 square feet of commercial. And they did put some open space on that site as well, in addition to what was being factored into the other parks on this site. So here you get, you know, 2 acre-and-a-half parks, 2 3/4 acre parks, and 2 half-acre linear parks over 73 acres. So that's what that standard looks like, the 400 square feet per dwelling unit plus 5,000 square feet per acre of non-residential. So that is what I have. And then I know SDCs always come up. So I did a slide next on how these cities deal with SDCs. So with North Plains, they consider the dedication or designation of the park to be part of your development exaction. So in North Plains, they have a very small staff. They're at about 3,400 residents, so a little bigger than Carlton, but not much. And their parks are maintained by their public works department. It's a very small staff. So they've made the policy decision to have most new park areas in these newer residential areas be maintained by the homeowners associations, but be accessible to the public. So the homeowners association keeps ownership and maintenance, but the city gets the land available to its residents. So as far as SDCs in North Plains, the land is considered an exaction, whether it's dedicated or designated, but any improvements to the park area, so the play structure, the tennis court, the basketball court, those items can be SDC creditable in North Plains, if that makes sense. So any improvements, you can come back and talk to the SDC person about getting credits for those. In Sherwood, they do things differently, sort of. They also consider the dedication or designation as part of the subdivision exactions. And they only typically will give an SDC credit if your park is larger than 1.5 acres. So they really expect the parks to be designated and built. And then if your park is larger, then an acre and a half, then you can come in for SDC credits. And they do that because that over 1.5 acres is considered larger than a neighborhood level park, and then so is in theory serving a lot more residents potentially in the community. You might at 1.5 acres, you're seeing more ball fields, you're maybe bringing more people to the site to recreate in that neighborhood. So they see it as a larger benefit to the community as a whole rather than just the residents. But both cities, and I called both cities just to make sure I had this right before I presented this information, and both were quick to caution me that they generally, in developments that will be large enough to require parks dedication and that would be considering SDC credits, they almost always use a development agreement process. So there's some level of negotiation that occurs between staff and the developer when considering SDCs on these parks. So I'll just put that out there. There wasn't a clear, like, exactly how SDCs are done. But that is how it's done in North Plains and Sherwood. Any questions about either of those? Ooh, we're right at 7:30.
I actually love the North Plains model. And a couple things I love about it. One is that if you have it as part of the subdivision or the homeowners association is taking care of it, then the people in the surrounding area, the people who live in those homes are actually have some ownership over how it's developed. So things that they're naturally interested in. If it's a community with a lot of families, then they have family-oriented recreational opportunities. And I also like it that they're required to do the maintenance. I think that takes some of the burden off the city staff. The other thing that I just noticed anecdotally about North Plains, I drive through there to get to Portland frequently, and man, you see people out all the time. There's people using the paths, there's people in the parks. You drive by, and it's a community that actually really uses their outdoor spaces. So something about what they're doing is working well. And I just seemed like looking at the map that they had a better distribution and variety of park space within their subdivisions. So I actually was really impressed with the North Plains model.
Thanks for that, Susie. That's great. And I know Elizabeth and Steve that I pushed just a minute over, and Steve, you have a couple housekeeping slides, and I want to be respectful of time. But if anyone else has any comments and are okay going over a few minutes, happy to take those.
Can I ask a question real fast of Shannon? The city council, just so I understand what our role here is, is the city council going to really be wrestling with the details of this, or we going to wrestle with the details and pass it on to them, or how is that going to play out, do you see?
The city council really asked for some follow-up on some areas that they were interested in. Ironically, the planner used two different cities, but similar concepts. And so we have a number of follow-up items that council asked for, with the hope that that can further guide your discussion. And then, so I see it as council taking some of the heavy lifting and then giving you guidance and have you wrestle with a little bit more of the details.
Okay, thank you.
So more to come on this topic.
Heather, thank you. This was really wonderful.
You're welcome.
Well, Elizabeth, let's go ahead to that last slide. So I think, so I was, apologize, I was out of town last week. I think I would have made a few revisions to this schedule, but generally speaking, with the guidance that you've provided and the guidance that we're getting from City Council, we will collectively be developing, fleshing out some proposals to bring back to you in June as to, more of the specifics on these different concepts that we've presented. Following that meeting in June, where we get kind of your feedback on the proposed changes, I think we want to have some sort of public meeting and or online survey. Anyway, some mechanisms for public feedback on those proposals before we move into revising the proposals based on your comments and public comments, and then eventually bringing those to Planning Commission and City Council. So I'll work on revising the schedule a bit, but I think I'll work with Amy, and tentatively we'll schedule our next meeting for sometime in June. That works with everyone's schedule, and also get some dates for proposed public involvement activities following later in June and into the summer before we finalize the concepts and move forward into the adoption process. So we have a little bit of some revisions to make to the schedule, but just know, I think the important takeaways are we'll be back to meet with you sometime in June, and then there will be some mechanism for public input following that June meeting.
So is our June time our last time together? Because
I
that
think
timeline showed the pack, there's no more pack after that.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to revisit as well. Just because personally, I would like to see us meet with you in June with these draft proposals, and then meet with you one final time to go over the final recommendations before they go to the adoption process. So that's one of the things that I'll work out with Amy and Shannon. But I'd like to see this group meet 2 more times, if you're all willing, that is.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time tonight. Great conversation, great discussion. That gives us a lot of information to move forward with as we develop these proposals. So we look forward to looping back with you in a few months with more information and more discussion.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth and Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Bye.